Hey, what's up? It's Tristan, and today I'm going to be doing my review of The Promised Neverland. Now, right off the bat, you can probably tell the background is a bit different than usual, and that's because this video is going to be more of a casual type of video, because this is going to be more of just a classic T-Dog video, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. So I don't have any volumes to showcase in this video. I returned them all to the library like a good Samaritan, but I have read all of the volumes. Basically, the general storyline for The Promised Neverland is there's a bunch of kids, the three main kids being Emma, Ray, and Norman, and they all live on this orphanage called Gracefield. And as it turns out, Gracefield actually isn't your normal orphanage because it's actually a farm. And it turns out that all the kids at this orphanage are actually being raised as food for demons. And with this knowledge, the three main characters make their goal to escape and to bring everyone else with them. Now, in terms of the story, that's pretty much where I'm going to leave it at. There's a lot more to it, obviously, and I barely covered the first chapter, and I did that on purpose, because a lot of the series, a lot of the enjoyment about The Promised Neverland is about all of the reveals and surprises that come along the way. So I really want to try my best not to spoil this series in the review. And I've really got to say that the first 5 volumes really hit the nail on the head in pretty much every department. And honestly, the first 5 volumes make up some of my favorite modern shonen. The first 5 volumes are super interesting, and all the reveals are super crazy, and you're always super excited to see what they're gonna be. And in case you haven't read The Promised Neverland, there is very little action in this series. Most of it is actually dialogue, and honestly, a lot of the times when there's a ton of dialogue in manga, I'm not always super interested in it. For instance, the manga Bakuman is a great manga, but it's very, very wordy to the point where it kind of loses me at times. But with The Promised Neverland, it never really feels super wordy just because it goes by pretty fast. And it manages to have a pretty fast pace just because how interesting it is, so you read it a lot faster than you'd think. And in the first 5 volumes, I was really impressed with how fresh they were able to keep the series. Early in the series, after I finished the first volume or two, I was wondering how they were going to keep the series up like this, because it seems like they were already showing so much of what they had planned that it seemed like there wouldn't be enough content to have good reveals later in the series. But new questions came up, and with the new questions, there were obviously some big answers that came up later in the series, and it really made for some super enjoyable content. I've always been a big fan of suspenseful manga, and I think that this manga is definitely no exception to that. I think that the reveals, the suspense, pretty much all of the thriller aspects in The Promised Neverland strike the nail on the head perfectly. After the first 5 volumes, the pacing slows down a little bit, which is kind of weird because the series doesn't really feel as wordy after the first 5 volumes. It has more action after those volumes, but I feel like the overall arcs tend to be a lot longer after the first 5 volumes. And I find it interesting how in The Promised Neverland, the action is way less interesting than the dialogue. I think one of the downsides to this is that sometimes when the series tries to go the action route, it's not always as interesting as it could be. And there's one arc going from volumes 9 to 11, or around that general area, that goes on for a little too long, and I honestly think it overstays its welcome by a little bit. I also think the art style is pretty good. In the beginning of the series, I wasn't really a huge fan of the art style, if I'm being completely honest. But as the series goes on, I feel like the artist gets a lot more detailed with the landscapes. The artist does an incredible job at really immersing you into the world of The Promised Neverland. So much so that towards the end of the series, some of the reveals can be kind of disappointing. But I'll talk about that a little later. In terms of the villains for the series, I think The Promised Neverland does a really good job. The only problem, though, is I think the human villains are often a lot more interesting than the demon villains, because pretty much all the main demons in The Promised Neverland wear these white masks. And I think a lot of the demons look really cool when they're wearing the masks, but as soon as they don't have the mask on, they look kind of lame, honestly. But at the same time, I like how a lot of the demons in The Promised Neverland look really ugly without their masks, because they seem less like over-the-top anime villains and more like actual characters who would live in those environments. If you've heard anything about the final arc in The Promised Neverland, though, you've probably heard that a lot of people were really disappointed by it. And as for my thoughts on that, I don't think that the last arc of The Promised Neverland is horrible. I actually really enjoyed it overall, but it's definitely not as good as a lot of the content before it. And there are some reveals that really are a letdown. And it got to the point where in the last 11 chapters, it felt like for every 2 good decisions, there was 1 bad decision. And I honestly don't think that the end of the series is frustrating. I just think it's kind of underwhelming. And honestly, it's pretty lame at points. And I know some people watching this video might not be super motivated to jump on The Promised Neverland now because of the ending. And if you're worried about that, I'd still recommend giving it a shot. I'd at least recommend checking out the first 5 volumes, and if you like that, I'd recommend reading the rest, because even though the end could have been a lot better, it also could have been a lot worse. But I also think that the end of The Promised Neverland is pretty shaky. Overall, I think The Promised Neverland is a very good manga. I'm a huge fan of short manga series, and to see a really good manga that's only 20 volumes long is pretty nice to see. But I do think that the end of the series could be longer. If it was 20, 30, 40, 50 chapters longer, I think it would really hit the nail on the head overall. I think it's a very good read, and I would definitely recommend it. And I definitely think this is a very good addition to Shonen Jump, and I think it's really going to pave the way for a lot of more mature and dark shonen manga in the future. I would say it's one of my favorite modern shonen manga, but I honestly haven't really read a ton of super modern shonen manga. I mean, I honestly don't even know most of the stuff that's currently in Shonen Jump magazine, but from the modern shonen manga I've read, it's definitely up there. With all that being said and done, that about wraps it up for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to slap that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment. I've been reading a lot of manga recently. I wasn't reading manga for a few months, but I jumped back on the grind. I'm gonna make some more videos. Not fully sure when, because I'm moving out of state soon. But once I get a hold on that, I'm definitely gonna be pumping out some bangers like you would not believe. Anyways, I will see you guys in the next video.